Susan Goffe, chairperson, Jamaicans for Justice. I'm back as chairperson again. When you look back at the security operations in West Kingston, though there were some operations outside in subsequent days, some of the concerns that come up obviously focus on the loss of life. That where you have an operation which results in the death of more than 70 citizens, it must raise human rights concerns. You had obviously a situation that had been allowed to develop in which a section of the city was being barricaded off, and there was not access for the legitimate security operations to take place. So undoubtedly there was need to look at how to deal with this. However, I think that we need to remember that not all the persons who live in a particular area are gunmen, and that within that area there were women, children, the elderly, completely innocent and uninvolved men, and there seemed to be an approach that did not fully take this into concern. I know that there are those who say, for example, well, people had an opportunity to leave, but we need really to look at that. There were people who were not free to make that choice, whether again because of age, infirmity. Children certainly didn't have that opportunity. There were people who were being internally intimidated. So it is a concern that an entire area or grouping of people might then be viewed as legitimate targets. Concerns that we have include the accounts that there are of persons who were in the custody of the security forces who were then in fact killed. So there are those serious allegations which would amount to extrajudicial killings. There are accounts or allegations of abuse of a variety of other kinds that took place, assaults. I think we also at the time expressed grave concerns about the wholesale rounding up of over 4,000 men in various targeted areas. The figure of 4,000 came, I believe, from the hierarchy of the force, and the accounts of how this was done, in our estimation, was in gross violation of people's rights, the freedom of movement, the fact that under the regulations of the state of emergency, it was allowed that they be fingerprinted and photographed, and that because of the regulations, those fingerprints and photographs, it is deemed it was legal or legitimate for them to be retained, even after people were released without any charge whatsoever. So I think that that is of grave concern. The detentions in and of themselves and the way that was handled. Conditions of detention were also a cause for concern, that there were accounts of persons being held in overcrowded conditions, without proper food or water being provided, and that in instances, many instances, people were not allowed to contact relatives to indicate where they were. Out of that situation, there also is the concern that there are a number of persons who are still unaccounted for, that there are people who have gone missing, who were last seen in the custody of police or soldiers. And that again is a grave concern, that persons can simply have disappeared. I think that we need to look at that issue very seriously. There are also accounts of persons who were last seen alive in the custody of the police or the military, and eventually were found by their relatives dead in the morgue. So that there are a lot of concerns about how that operation was carried out, about the activities of the security forces, and those remain with us to today. One of the largest problems is that there has been absolutely no accountability for this entire operation. There has been no formal inquiry. To date, there has been no indication on the part of the Prime Minister and his administration that they are committed to such an inquiry. I think that the public defender has been moving forward as best he can, given the limited resources, but from a very early stage he indicated that there was a need for an inquiry into this. Jamaicans for Justice supports him in that position. There is a need for an inquiry. At this point in time, there isn't even an agreement on the number of people who died. The official figure is 73. There are higher estimates than that, some by persons in official positions and also by members of the community. And I think that that is a starting point. We can't be satisfied with a situation in which we are not even clear the number of citizens who, in fact, were killed during this incident. The process of investigation obviously is taking a long time. Our understanding is that the public defender has had to make requests for assistance in carrying out some of the tests, the ballistics tests. We know that the postmortems needed outside help to independent pathologists to oversee and in some cases I think perhaps perform some of those autopsies, and that there was a requirement that they be carried out at a particular standard so that the information collected would be of best use in any subsequent inquiry. I think that the feeling that you get at some points that there are those in the society who would like simply to move on, who feel that there is no need to go back into that we should just perhaps forget about it. There even seems to be some indication that some people would like to overwrite the history of what actually happened, so that the details that we already know are skewed in a particular way to give a particular image of what happened, why it happened, etc., to kind of make it more acceptable or tolerable. But we have to just come back to the position that this was an operation that resulted in the deaths of scores of citizens, and we can't leave it at that. So we are completely dissatisfied with that seeming failure to commit to. Yes, perhaps it is taking a long time, perhaps it could have been done more quickly. Those are all questions one could ask, but there must be a commitment to a full, exhaustive investigation and accountability at the end of it. Well, I think one of the things that that always is encouraging is where there is an unwillingness on the part of some within the society to simply let this go. That there are the voices that continue to say, no, there must be a proper inquiry. I think that the public defender has taken some unpopular stands at points, but that mechanism and process is pushing forward. I think that there is a need for louder and firmer voices in all segments of the society. But I am heartened by the fact that there are those within the society, various sectors of the society, who continue to call for this. And I think that it's one of the things also that the media has a vital role to play to continue to bring the issue back to the fore and point to the fact that it is unresolved. I mean, we can point to falling crime figures, we can point to feelings of relief on the part of some, but we have not, in fact, accounted for what happened. There has been no accountability. The society does not, in fact, know the circumstances of those deaths. We still do not know what happened to all the people who were involved. We can't stop until we do. I think one of the things that has been heightened out of this is an issue that has for much of our recent history dogged the society, which is the connection between politics and alleged crime gangs. I think that has been a very strong link. There have been numerous calls over decades for the breaking of that link, that there is a need to look at the way in which the political garrisons developed and existed and were fostered by and encouraged and supported and protected by politicians across administrations. We have had numerous looks at the detrimental way in which the garrisonization of communities has impacted on the human rights of the persons living in those areas. The pressure to vote in a particular way, the pressure to behave in a particular way which is in line with the internal rules of communities, the way in which people's freedom of movement has been affected, that people from differing political backgrounds are not free to move in and out of certain areas, the coercion that often exists. There have been accounts of the way in which there has been the violation of women and girls, the rights of women and girls, in conjunction with the functioning of a garrison. It is not a simple situation, because there are those who have said that area leaders, gangs, dons provide a level of protection for those within a community. People speak about being able to leave their doors open, that women are protected from rape, that theft is at a low level, that some of these areas have very low internal crime rates. But what do people in those communities have to give up in order to maintain that situation, to be protected in that way? What you need is a society in which every citizen feels protected by the state. That's who must offer protection. And it's not as though we are in some kind of feudal system where you pledge allegiance to a local don, area leader, whoever, gang leader, and you then receive, because of your allegiance, you then receive a certain level of benefit. No, people must be completely free to access all the services of a country. We must be able to provide all the services in all the areas. There cannot be a sort of seceding from the rule of law within communities as a sort of trade-off for political protection. The Carr report back in the late 1990s spoke about this alliance of politics and crime, and the need for the de-garrisonization of communities. And now that means a lot to differing things to different people. But what we need to look at is, are we saying that the society, the state, can simply say the protection of these communities is left in the hand of private individuals, whether they are gangs or political affiliates or what? Or are we saying that the state must provide the protection, that the people in those communities are entitled to be protected by the police, they're entitled to have the services that are offered in any other community without having to give up their freedoms of movement, of choice, of expression, etc.? Yes, absolutely. And this is in fact why it is necessary for there to be accountability. If you do not have accountability, then basically what you are saying is what happened there can happen elsewhere. I think that at the beginning of what was happening, where there were attacks on the police stations, where there was the barricading of the community, Jamaicans for Justice was in support of that limited state of emergency in order to allow for an operation that would bring back law and order. But what unfolded, as I had said before, raises grave concerns about violations of human rights. And if we do not examine and investigate and inquire into the circumstances of those deaths, if we do not examine and evaluate the behavior of the security forces, how the operation was carried out, then basically what we are saying is it can be repeated. And in a sense, this was a repeat, because we had the earlier incursion into West Kingston in, was it 2002, 2003, where you had more than 20 people having died. There was an inquiry, but the findings were, again, there were problems with the findings and problems with that process, and even some of the recommendations that could have led to changes were not followed. So in a sense, basically, there was no accountability for that operation when 20-odd people died. So here we are years later with 70-odd people dying. If there is no accountability, then basically what we are saying is this method, this mechanism can be used again and again. And what are we waiting for? 500 people to die? Does it have to happen in uptown Jamaica for it to make the kind of impact that makes us realize we can't have operations like this and no proper accountability? We're just absolutely committing ourselves to further operations of this kind. It does set a precedent. If there is no accountability, it certainly does set a precedent. It's one of the major concerns that Jamaicans for Justice has. Over the years, we have had the problems with detentions being one of the largest categories of complaints that we have received at our office. And I think that it is a flagrant violation of the rights of persons, the way in which detention is often carried out. And it is often targeted against particularly men of a certain age, between the ages, you have said, 16 and early 30s, where it is routine for persons to be taken in on the flimsiest of evidence, held in appalling conditions in police lockups. If you have read any of the reports, or if you have had the misfortune to visit any of the lockups, you know that what we are talking about is appalling conditions. The last year, when the special rapporteur on torture, cruel and inhuman punishment and treatment visited Jamaica with his team, in their report they said that some of the lockups that they saw in Jamaica were the worst that he had ever visited in all the visits that he had made to a variety of countries. Not just the worst in this area regionally, but they were among the worst conditions that he had seen in terms of the overcrowding, the insanitary conditions, the infestation of vermin, and that they were just absolutely inhuman. And so you take a young man on a flimsy evidence, and you put him into that situation. Often people are kept there for not just days, weeks, without being brought before the court, without being charged. Often they are not, in fact, allowed to make contact with their families, so family members may not know where they are. They are not informed of their right in Jamaican law to the services of a duty counsel lawyer from the moment they are arrested. But they're not informed or assigned a duty counsel lawyer. They're not brought before the court. And then very often they are released. We have cases in which people have have lost their jobs, where they are small businessmen, have had their livelihood destroyed. They are released without charge very often, and what is an invidious position, if they attempt to seek redress, if they do bring complaints, very often what you find happening is that they become targeted. They become targeted for harassment. And so, I mean, it's an untenable situation. It's an untenable situation that does need to be dealt with. Now, what happened with the incursion last year is it almost gave an approval to the use of detention as a mechanism for I don't know, harassment, intimidation. I think that the provisions under the state of emergency last year for complaints or appeals of detention were shown to be completely inadequate in dealing with the situation. And there seems to be wide-scale support or justification among certainly some levels within the police force, within the political directorate, within the broader society, within the government, that the detention of those 4,000 men during that, what was a positive thing, was something that was completely legitimate and acceptable. Our position is really what you are looking at is a violation of people's rights. There were accounts of people walking out of their gate, having no knowledge of what was going on, getting up to walk out their gate to go to work, and just being scooped up by the police and soldiers, and ending up spending a couple of days being photographed and fingerprinted, released without any charge whatsoever, And I think that we need to be careful that in the bringing in of some of the crime bills, that we are not again encouraging the feeling that detention, extended detention, is a legitimate mechanism.